From that, we move on to another interview, and very quickly we take a look at the United Nations Secretary General António Guterres lauded South Africa's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In an exclusive interview with the SABC, Guterres said the manner in which South Africa and African countries have managed the coronavirus pandemic has set an example for the rest of the world. The UN office in South Africa has been closely monitoring COVID-19 developments in the country and continues to report back to its headquarters in New York on all developments. Well, joining us now, we have resident coordinator for the UN in South Africa, Nardos Bekele-Thomas. Great to have you. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much. Good morning.
Thank you. So we obviously were very flattered by the remarks from the UN Secretary General and our handling of the situation. However, there was something that came out yesterday from the World Health Organization saying that the organization doesn't think that South Africa is ready to go down to level 3. Is this a major concern for the WHO and the UN, seeing South Africa moving to another level and perhaps undoing all the good?
Thank you very much. Well, you see, what we do is normally give a framework and sort of a guidance based on what other countries experience and the knowledge that we have globally, and we put it at the disposal of the government. It's up to the government to analyze that and make sure that, the security of its citizens are intact and, are safeguarded before we move from one level to the other. What I know is that moving from level 5 to level 4, I know that the government has given, really a very serious thought, analyzed the situation to put us where we are now. Going to level 3, we will see, as you know, even the opening of schools. Well, I was just listening to the person that you had just before me, and was listening to all the concerns that the national, he is the national chair of the National Association of Schools, has just said is also our concern. Yeah, but what we are doing is trying to help the government, to support the government, whatever capacity they would like us to be. Them. Yeah. So yes, going from level 4 to level 3 and defining what that level 3 would be and defining what the state of the affair is very critical. Yeah, we need to have a risk assessment, a total risk assessment, before we move from one level to the other, so that we do not, reverse
the good that's been done. Would the UN...
Yes, right, exactly.
You mentioned schools, and this would be very important because obviously the UN and the WHO overseeing everything and looking at how different countries are moving to different levels and schools opening. I mean, we saw South Korea, in fact, opening their schools today. Some, however, I'm seeing closed hours after opening because it was a big concern and a big worry. Now, these are very, very developed countries. Are you worried sending schools, children back into schools from the UN perspective? Because we as South Africa are nowhere near our peak. We've been told it's coming August, September. Does it concern you putting children at risk by sending them back to schools?
We've been having discussions with UNICEF, WHO, the UNESCO colleagues yesterday regarding what kind of measures need to be taken. And, it's very clear. I mean, the safety of the children is very important. The safety of teachers is very important because, some of the teachers might be even, older teachers. So we need to really look at that. The safety of even students with chronic diseases, with underlying conditions should be taken, into account. But then when you come to the preparedness, it's very critical and very important that the water tanks are there so that, children observe the protocol of hygiene. They have to have, the space, the social distancing. I think, like in China and in Singapore and in other countries, what they have done is exactly what this country is proposing, which is just having two classes, so that these two classes would be occupying the whole school, and the teachers would take shifts so that social distancing is really properly planned.
And
But we have to really make sure that all these measures are taken care of. In addition, children come from their homes to school, like, and they need transport. What kind of transport? Is the transport system safe enough for the children to travel? Is the meal system? All these things are to be examined and assessed prior to letting the children go to school. As a mother and as a grandmother, I would fear for my children because I can only control myself and my child. But, when you expose your child to others, then the others have to hold also themselves and their children responsible. So, we need to really have also the communication very clear out there. But on the other hand, we cannot lock down all the time. At one point in time, we have to open. And I really understand also the challenge, especially for schools that are in the rural setup, where they don't have all the infrastructure. For them not to be able to benefit from schooling is also a big problem. I mean, it deepens the inequality. So how do you take, the balance between all this humanitarian response, the health response, and also making sure that we do not deepen inequality, we do not worsen unemployment, is very critical and very important. So that balancing act is something that is challenging for Africa, because, as you know, this pandemic is, has really, in a way, like the president always says, revealed, or it has shown us that there has been a lot of what do you call it, negligence in meeting the MDGs. So there is the unfulfilled promise of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. If you talk about water, if you talk about education, if you talk about hygiene, if you talk about nutrition, if you talk about food security, poverty, and all this, where our goals, the Millennium Development Goals, and we never fulfilled this promise. And then come to SDGs.
That's
5 years later.
Yeah.
And, we shouldn't be coerced by crisis to do what is good for the country. But on the other hand, I would like to say this, and why we really, the Secretary General praises this government, is that the government understood that inequality is number one priority. And if you remember, the government was just launching the district development model, going to the people, addressing in an integrated, comprehensive way, the whole challenges, gamut of challenges. And, that's when we were caught by this pandemic. So, it's the unfinished business that is really much more problematic. And we should, all these things that we were talking were agendas that we should have really attended to over the last how many years.
I would love
this
to.
Is what
I'd
African
love to.
countries
I would love to
are,
continue. Unfortunately, we've run into time, but I must say you've brought across some very important points, and we certainly will invite you back to get a little bit more perspective from you on this. But touching on vital issues was the resident coordinator for the UN in South Africa, Nardos Bekele-Thomas, just talking about South Africa's management of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks again for your time. All right, let's